Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Thursday, July 2nd. I'm Sarith Hawk. Coming up, many people in California are still trying to get their lives together following wildfires in recent years. And a software used by many insurance companies has often left some homeowners without sufficient coverage.
So we've found many instances where people who had 360 value estimates were underinsured by 40% or more.
We revisit a conversation with the authors of that investigation in just a moment. But first, these news headlines. Investigators served a handful of search warrants yesterday in the city of Avenal. The Kings County District Attorney's Office says these are related to an ongoing investigation, but did not elaborate what it's investigating. The search warrants come during a messy fight in Avenal. City council officials have tried to continue holding office after a recall election ousted them. Immigrant advocates are calling on the president of the State Center Community College District Board of Trustees to resign. Rob Fuentes is also running for Fresno City Council. He's under fire from immigrant advocates who zeroed in on his work as a federal prosecutor handling immigration cases. The group, known as Fresno Resistance, plans to speak out at the State Center Trustees meeting today. We reached out to Fuentes for a response, but did not hear back in time for this newscast. California's Department of Motor Vehicles is on track to share driver's license data with a national database. The plan is moving forward despite concerns from immigrant advocates that the information could expose people to deportation. Carrie Johnson with our news partner Cal Matters has the details.
Governor Gavin Newsom signed a state budget on Monday that designates $55 million to fund the data sharing plan. Lawmakers had previously refused to approve the initiative, but conceded after certain guardrails were built into a companion measure. The system will share part of drivers' Social Security numbers and use a placeholder for license holders who don't have one, which some advocates worry will make it easier to single out undocumented people.
Cal Matters' Carrie Johnson reporting. State officials have said they are sharing the data to stay in compliance with the federal Real ID Act and have warned that airports could stop accepting California IDs if the state chose not to comply. A bill advancing in the state legislature is aiming to go after unregulated, invasive technology that tracks movements and infers sensitive personal information. Los Angeles Democratic Assembly member Isaac Bryan is the bill's author. He says employer surveillance takes various forms.
Call center workers, for example, may be required to use tools that employ emotional recognition and generative AI to analyze interactions. These systems send constant nudges to alter worker behavior and provide data to supervisors for corrective measures. Workers face risks of bias, discrimination, and error, usually without knowing they are being monitored in this way.
Opponents argue the bill's broad language prevents the use of routine equipment such as security cameras. The measure has passed the Senate's Privacy, Digital Tech, and Consumer Protection Committee. It heads next to Appropriations. California wants to make food labels less confusing by banning so-called sell-by dates. A new law that started yesterday requires manufacturers to use just 2 labels. One of them is, quote, best if used by for peak quality, and the other is, quote, used by for safety. State officials hope the change reduces food waste and emissions. California is the first state to standardize labels, with New York following suit. Other states are considering similar laws.
Explore the history of the people and places of our region with KVPR's Central Valley Roots. I'm the host, Joe Moore. Every new episode, I bring you little-known stories of our region. Find the latest episode of Central Valley Roots wherever you get your podcasts, or visit kvpr.org/roots.
And now to our main story. As we enter the typical fire season in California, some residents are still trying to get their life together from past wildfires that claimed everything, including their homes. Many homeowners had insurance to cover some of the costs of rebuilding, but many others didn't. In fact, a lawsuit filed by homeowners in the Southern California communities of Altadena and Pacific Palisades accuses major insurance companies of colluding to drop their policies. The lawsuit is still playing out in court, but today we're going to discuss a little-known tool that plays a major role in how insurance companies actually estimate coverage and rebuilding costs for homes. We're revisiting a conversation with KVPR's Elizabeth Arkalian and two reporters who spent time investigating the use of the tool known as 360 Value. They found many issues with the way it's used, primarily with the system's algorithm. Susie Neilson and Megan Van Munce published their investigation for the San Francisco Chronicle last year. Earlier this year, their reporting won a Pulitzer Prize, one of the highest recognitions in journalism. Susie begins our conversation by discussing a family that's been affected by underinsurance.
I'd love to focus on one of the families that we interviewed in depth for this story, the Salazar family. So we spent a fair amount of time with Richard and Linda Salazar, an elderly couple who live in Grizzly Flats, which is a rural community in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Linda and Richard have owned their house for a couple of decades, and they escaped from the city to this beautiful community in the mountains because they had experienced a lot of hardship in their youth, and it really felt like, as they called it, their little slice of heaven up in Grizzly Flats. And prior to 2021, which is where their real story begins, they had purchased a home insurance policy with Farmers Insurance. And they told us that they had every reason to believe that that policy would cover their home in the event of a loss. And they cared about that a lot because they knew that they were in this risky fire risk area in Grizzly Flats, surrounded by trees, in this rural area. They even bought additional insurance coverage, what's called extended replacement coverage, just in case, just to feel comfortable and safe that they had enough insurance. And then in 2021, when the Caldor fire hit, it devastated Grizzly Flats. It wiped out more than 400 homes, including the Salazar's home. And it was only then that they learned that their insurance policy was only going to give them about $340,000, but a contractor told them it would actually cost about $540,000 to replace their home. So they were hundreds of thousands of dollars short of what they'd need to rebuild.
Yeah, and there are other stories like that in your reporting. Megan, in your reporting with Susie, you both described this concept of, quote, underinsurance. Can you just explain exactly what that is?
Absolutely. So the vast, vast majority of Californians, 97%, according to the California Department of Insurance, have a home insurance policy that's called replacement cost coverage. And to a lot of homeowners, you might hear that and think, okay, this home insurance policy is going to replace my home if it burns down in a wildfire. But the truth is that these policies come with a set coverage limit, a maximum amount that your insurance company will pay you if you lose your home. So underinsurance, we found, is what happens when someone's home burns down and their coverage limit is too low to sometimes even approach the idea of rebuilding their house. And it can impact people in a variety of ways. It can be caused by a variety of things, but a major driver, according to our reporting, is that insurance companies are using algorithms to set these coverage limits that are routinely underestimating the cost of building in California.
Susie, you also report about a system that these major insurers use to determine estimates for home insurance called 360 Value. And you made some pretty startling discoveries about this. How does it work? Or maybe the bigger question is, does it work?
What Megan and I found was about 2/3 of the insurance market in the US relies on this tool called 360 Value to set coverage limits for homeowners. So what that means is that more likely than not, maybe your insurance policy was set with this tool. And it's what's called a component cost algorithm, which sounds really wonky. But what it basically is, it's a tool that tries to sketch this picture of what your house looks like based on how many planks it has, what its roof looks like, how many bathrooms it has, how many nails are, holding it together, like that level of detail. And using all that information, which it tries to put together from all this data, It then spits out an estimate of what it would cost to rebuild the exact home that you have today if it burned down in a fire or if it was destroyed in some other way. And that is what usually is the number that you get for your insurance. So what we found is that the company that created 360 Value, Verisk, will always say that they don't claim that their tool is accurate. And that's because they say it's impossible to accurately measure exactly how much it would cost. But we found that it's not just that it's not 100% accurate, that often 360 Value isn't even getting close. So we found many instances where people who had 360 Value estimates were underinsured by 40% or more. And we bought the tool ourselves actually to test it out. And we tested it out on a number of homes. And so one thing that the tool does is it automatically fills in a bunch of data about your house. It's basically making all these educated guesses. And we found that a lot of time those educated guesses were wrong.
I mean, Susie, can we outline some of the major insurers that are relying on this tool, and are they still relying on it?
Yes. Megan and I identified 4 major insurance companies in California, together representing about 40% of the market. And it's likely that there's a lot more insurance companies. We just focused on these 4 because we found a lot of records about them. So they are State Farm, Farmers Insurance, USAA, and CSAA, the Northern California arm of AAA. So all of these companies have either found out through lawsuits or government investigations or both that their use of 360 Value was causing many of their policyholders to be steeply underinsured. And in fact, in one part of the story, we go into depth about Farmers Insurance because we obtained this big trove of records from a lawsuit against farmers that showed that employees at Farmers had done this internal investigation that found that many of their wildfire survivors that had policies were steeply underinsured. And, they investigated it, they looked into it. And then several months in, they decided to stop their investigation because they were worried about getting sued, basically. The emails show that they had gotten all these complaints and they were worried about creating additional records that might incriminate them. And so they basically just terminated their investigation.
And Megan, I know you both tried to take this information and concerns from homeowners directly to insurers. You were not really given an answer by them. So how is the insurance industry responding to your investigation?
Across the board, most of the insurance companies we reached out to declined to comment and asked us to speak with representatives of different industry groups. And what those representatives of industry groups told us is that insurance companies don't have an incentive to underinsure people, that if they were fully insuring homes, then they would be providing better customer service and they would also be collecting more in premiums. But what we find is that that's completely out of touch with the empirical evidence. I mean, there are surveys from California wildfires finding that as many as 70 to 80% of people in those fires were underinsured. There are academic studies in other states like Colorado that show that about 3/4 of people there are underinsured. And so if the insurance industry has no incentive, there's a question of, well, then why are so many people underinsured? And a response that they'll give is that people are shopping around, they're looking for the lowest premium, and they may not be paying attention to the fact that a lower premium is coming at the expense of a lower coverage amount. And I think if we were in a normal market, you could see that someone who is being informed about their insurance policy and is shopping around can say, thanks for that offer, but I want more coverage, and so I'll go to a different insurance company. But what we're seeing in the current environment is that people just are trying to get any insurance policy they can if it's not the California Fair Plan. And so they may go to a company who tells them, we'll only give you this much coverage. We're hearing a lot of people who read our investigation and went to their insurance company and said, I think I might be underinsured. Can I have more coverage? To which their insurance company told them, no, our calculator says you don't need that much more coverage, or we are insuring homes for that amount. And so I think the current insurance crisis is really exacerbating this issue and reinforcing that it really isn't homeowners these days who are choosing how much coverage or whether they're fully insured.
That was KVPR's Elizabeth Arkalian speaking with reporters Susie Neilson and Megan Van Munce. They investigated the use of a tool known as 360 Value, which is used to estimate insurance costs for homeowners. Their investigation, called Burned, found that the system's algorithm is filled with problems. Earlier this year, their work was recognized with a Pulitzer Prize. And that does it for today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden, Elizabeth Arkalian, Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado, and KVPR, with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Sarith Hawk. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.